The Echo Parakeet in Mauritius is the sole survivor of the parrot species that were once found in the Mascarene Islands in the Indian Ocean. Habitat loss, invasive species, cyclones and infectious disease are just some of the reasons the echo was once named the world's rarest parrot. The species has been on a journey of survival and recovery for decades.
It began with a kestrel some 40 years ago, which was at the brink of extinction. In Mauritius, we have lost so many species which were unique to the island. The famous dodo is one example. So the government of Mauritius, we started to have collaboration with international partners.
I'm one of those partners and have been researching the conservation genetics behind the survival of the species at DICE, the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology, which is part of the University of Kent. I've been interested in disease and how the echo parakeets breed, with the aim of increasing the population. Decades of collaborative conservation and genetics research later, there are now around 800 echoes flourishing across the island. But saving the echo parakeet didn't start with my work, it began a couple of decades earlier, and Professor Carl Jones was one of the first international researchers to work on the project.
I came to Mauritius in the late 1970s to work on some of the world's rarest birds, the Mauritius kestrel, the echo parakeet and the pink pigeon. We came up here in 1979, going through the forest, looking for parakeets, and we could only find a handful. Restoring a species is something that happens over many, many decades. We established a population, but we also started working with local biologists, training people. We established our own organisation, the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation. We worked with government and helped form the National Parks and Conservation Service. That whole journey was not just about restoring the parrot, it was about using the parrot to actually develop the conservation movement in Mauritius.
Fast forward from the 1970s to the early 2000s, and we thought that the echo parakeet was well on the way to recovery, but we were wrong. In 2005, my first PhD student at DICE, Claire Raisin, and I had started our genetic research, only to discover that the echoes were threatened with extinction once again by cytosine beak and feather disease.
They were already a very inbred species, so to then encounter a highly transmissible virus, it's not surprising that people felt quite worried about it. I think that was at the point when a lot of the intensive conservation management, all of that had to stop overnight, was that right?
Yeah, exactly. First thing we needed to do was to minimise the contact. We no longer took any birds from the wild into captivity. We stopped all captive breeding and hand rearing. We were wearing full almost like hazmat suits. All of our equipment was being disinfected between each site.
You were the first person to do genetic work on the echo parakeets.
I was, yeah. We had a couple of hundred blood samples stored away in a freezer. One of the first things that I did was to develop a set of genetic markers.
To know the genealogy and the pedigree of a wild population is so valuable, and your work started that process so we could then map the offspring to find out how related they were.
But we can't conduct our research without the field teams who manage the parakeet population and the virus on the ground, or more accurately, up in the trees.
There was 2 chicks, and the female was in the tree opposite to the nest box tree. Echoes are really intelligent, so they have their own personalities. So having worked with them for a long time, I can tell through their behavior who they are, especially for Mauritian to know, like that's like part of our heritage, you know.
And the ringing is going to let us follow these individuals throughout their life. So one, it gives us an idea of how many individuals exist within the population. But then 2, it allows us to have these life histories. The main disease affecting the echoes is the cytosine beak and feather disease. It's going to present itself as yellow feathers. And if it's a severe infection, they're going to lose so many feathers that they won't be able to fly anymore. And then if they can't fly, they won't be able to feed, and they won't be able to get away from predators, and it can be lethal.
With this data being recorded, we can keep track of how the echoes were breeding and relate this to their genetics.
We found that, the population at Belle-Homme versus the population here in the gorges had become genetically distinct.
Species need to have genetic diversity within their population to allow them to adapt and evolve to future challenges. When populations become very, very small and rare alleles in the population are the first alleles to be lost through what we call random genetic drift, which is the process where rare alleles are lost just through random chance because certain breeding pairs won't breed in a certain season and therefore won't transmit their genes into the next generation.
Hushna is a scientific officer with the National Parks and Conservation Service who works to involve local communities in conservation and raises awareness around the diverse range of species in Mauritius.
Those echo parakeet birds, they are surviving very well in the wild, and even we have had a reintroduction of birds from the founder population Black River Gorges National Parks to other parts of the island, the Bamboo Mountain Range, which is in the eastern part of the island. The study of the genetic structure, the genetic viability, the genetic stability of the echo parakeet birds being studied by the University of Kent is of utmost importance if we want to ensure their survivorship.
Back in the forest, we take blood samples from all of the birds. Having access to this allows us to screen for disease, and we can also analyse their genetic diversity and levels of inbreeding.
So that sample gets stored at -80 degrees for long-term storage. We take the samples back to DICE at the University of Kent, extract the DNA, and then we'll sequence the virus. So if this individual is actually infected, then we'll isolate DNA of the virus from the blood sample, and we can sequence the DNA and look at and see what viral genotype or viral haplotype this particular individual has, and then compare it to all of the other individuals that we know to be infected, and we can see patterns in how the virus is mutating.
I then met Professor Kok van Oosterhout from the University of East Anglia. We're now working together to sequence the genomes of the echo parakeets.
We have now access to data sets that were unthinkable in the past. So we can really look not only at genetic variation but also at the mutational load. They have gone through this bottleneck, and then all these mutations, or some of them, can become in high frequency in the population.
And that's unnatural. And so the conservation genomic work that we're doing today, which is cutting edge, is to try and remove and reduce the frequency of those bad mutations, to try and return the genetic composition of the population to a state that it was in before the population became very, very rare.
And in some of the part of the genome you have these ultra-conserved elements that are DNA sequences that have not changed for millions and millions of years. If there is a mutation or a change in that particular sequence, it's probably going to be deleterious.
For me, sequencing the whole genomes of these species allows us for the first time to try and quantify the effects of these bad mutations, and that's something we've never really been able to do before.
And it's exciting that we can begin to understand what is putting different species at risk. And it's also vital to help the echo population survive on its own. The native forest in Mauritius is also crucial. It's tall and dense, the perfect place for parakeets to nest and find food, but there's only a few % of it left.
So around 25% of Mauritius is considered under forest cover. Native forest, much of it is degraded by invasive alien species. However, not all of it is native forest, much of it is planted forest.
These alien species, like invasive guava, pose a real threat to the native forests and therefore the echoes too. But in the south of Mauritius, Ebony Forest is on a mission to restore the native ecosystem. Not only are they replanting trees alongside the work of the National Parks and Conservation Service, they're reintroducing parakeets to help disperse seeds, helping the forest grow.
Using the screening that is done at DICE, we are able to see which pair we can collect from, because at the start we want to bring birds that are going to be healthy, because there's going to be a stress being moved from their boxes from the national park to Ebony Forest. They are going to be fed until they fledge and wean, and once they can fly well and feed by themselves, then they will be released, and we hope they will just set up in the area, start making babies and spreading the seeds around.
What we're trying to do now is to learn the role that diet plays in the breeding performance and productivity of echo parakeets. So as we've seen already, the echo parakeets benefit from supplementary feeding. They will lay more eggs, and there's a greater chance that their chicks will fledge successfully. But we can't do that forever. The native forests that are behind me and which are being conserved by all of these organisations collaboratively, they are going to be the long-term future for the echo parakeets. And so we're using DNA metabarcoding. For each individual bird, we'll have a menu of what they've eaten. We then sequence all of the DNA that's found in the fecal samples of the echo parakeet fledglings, and we can then relate that information to the extent to which the native habitat is contributing to the fitness of individuals.
And the future looks bright with collaboration.
Getting them back to what we have now is some 800 species, which seems to be a huge success, because what we are doing at the national parks is to ensure that the species survives for future generations. Restoring the ecosystem which have been degraded for a long time is a long and difficult process. That's why we are trying to get the bird to cover the whole island, which obviously is going to increase and to help us in keeping this biodiversity.
With much still to do to maintain the future of this island's ecosystem, we're not stopping at Mauritius.
I think the Echo Parakeet is a great symbol for what we should be doing on Mauritius, what we can do elsewhere in the world. And there are so many parrots out there that are threatened, that are declining, and I'd like us to be an example of what can be done through science, through field work, through planning, through vision. We are not stopping here. I think we are going to go to Réunion next, restoring the birds to a place where they've gone extinct. It will be one of the world's first or a unique example where we are trying to, especially in the south, in the global south, where such types of translocations are being undertaken.
And we have Mauritius to thank for unlocking new potential.
Islands have really informed the way we think about the world. The first time we realised a species had become extinct was on an island with the dodo. We're not trying to turn the clock back and recreate systems as they once were, but we're looking forward and thinking, how can we mitigate the effects of climate change? How can we actually adapt to a world which is changing very rapidly?
The answer is the work we're doing here in Mauritius, which can be applied worldwide. And now the Echo Parakeet has become an icon of successful species restoration.